So Danielle spoke at our 2015 meeting in person, so we were thrilled when she agreed on a snowy DC day to join us remotely so that both of us are in different places because of the snow instead of together, but we're thrilled that you're with us today. So she's going to talk about opportunities for rare disease research funding at PCORI. And it's going to be a little different than usual. I'm going to be forwarding those slides today. So if you hear next slide, please, you'll know why. So thanks again, Danielle, and I'm going to mute my side and let you take it away and just let me know when you're ready for the next slide.
Okay, great. Thank you, Deborah. So hi, everyone. Again, I'm Danielle Witcher. I'm a program officer in the Clinical Effectiveness Research Group here at PCORI. And if we go to the next slide, what I'd like to talk about today is just give you a little bit of background on PCORI, including what it is that we were implemented to do. Then I'll talk about our different types of research awards that you could consider applying to if you have an idea for a comparative effectiveness research project around a rare disease. I'll also provide some examples of rare disease projects we've funded to give you a flavor of the types of things that we support. And I'm also going to talk about some other types of programmatic awards that we have, and these aren't meant to support research, but they are awards that a lot of investigators take advantage of as they are preparing to do research that might be supported by PCORI. And finally, I'm going to talk about PCORI's engagement rubric. The reason I want to talk about this is, as you'll hear throughout the presentation, something that is unique about PCORI is that we require the engagement of patients and other types of stakeholders throughout the research process. So this engagement rubric becomes really important for people who are considering applying to PCORI. Next slide. And I'm going to stop after each section to take any questions, but in the meantime, if there's anything that comes up, I am guessing there's a raising the hand feature in this WebEx, so you can feel free to ask questions at any time.
And Danielle, you guys can also text me if you have a question and it doesn't raise the hand. I have my cell phone here just in case.
Oh, great. Okay, so PCORI is a private nonprofit independent research funder that was authorized by Congress in 2010. And the overall mission of PCORI is to help people make informed healthcare decisions and to improve healthcare delivery and outcomes by producing and promoting high-integrity, evidence-based information that comes from research guided by patients, caregivers, and the broader healthcare community. And that last bolded section really speaks to this idea of patient and stakeholder engagement that I mentioned on the last slide and that I will touch on again at the end of the presentation. So if we go to the next slide, the way that PCORI fulfills its mission is by funding patient-centered outcomes research. And what that is research that compares two or more commonly used options, and those can be treatments or ways of delivering care or diagnostic options that work for the prevention, diagnosis, treatment, or management of a clinical condition. So the key message in this first sub-bullet is that these are not new options. Instead, these are treatments or ways of delivering care that are already being used in the clinical community and where there's some evidence that they improve outcomes for patients, but where there are outstanding questions about which one of the available options is best and for which subsets of patients. PCOR fills evidence gaps that are important to patients and other relevant stakeholders. It's research that is conducted in real-world populations in real-world settings. It considers outcomes that are relevant to patients, and generally investigators support the idea that the outcomes they have selected are relevant to patients by engaging patients in developing their research proposals. And it engages patients and other stakeholders in the design and conduct of the research. At PCORI, we are particularly interested in research that focuses on high-priority conditions, and we define those as conditions that affect a large number of people across a range of populations, as well as conditions that place a heavy burden on families, individuals, specific populations in society. And we think this latter bullet really includes many rare diseases. So, you know, we're often asked by investigators and others how to go about thinking through what might be a reasonable proposal for PCORI, and we often provide the advice that, you know, one way of going about identifying an evidence gap that might be appropriate for PCORI funding is to take the following steps. And those include first examining the choices people make about options for managing a disease, and really thinking through, are there a variety of different ways that clinicians suggest managing this disease or that we see patients being treated? Do different doctors recommend different treatments or management approaches? If we see this type of variation in standard clinical practice, the next step is to consider how compelling it is to make a choice among those options for patients, their families, their caregivers, and others in the healthcare community. We then suggest assessing the evidence about the available options and their important outcomes through looking at the scientific literature and evidence gaps that are important to decision makers. These may be called out in things such as clinical guidelines. And if the literature suggests that this is an important evidence gap, from there, the next step would be formulating a research question and designing a project that compares the benefits and harms associated with each of those options. So on the next slide, I just provided an example of a PCOR question or a comparative question that is something that PCORI might be interested in funding. And I think what's important to take away from this slide is that the question directly mentions the types of outcomes that will be measured, although I think this could even be clearer in this question, the exact outcomes that will be looked at. It tells what options will be compared, and it describes who will be enrolled in the study. So this isn't a rare disease focused question, but I do think it's just a nice example of how you might go about structuring a research question that could be considered for PCORI funding. Next slide. So that's the end of the first part of the first section of the presentation, and as I mentioned, I can stop now and just see if there's any questions about what PCORI is essentially.
Can I ask a question that I think everyone else might be scared to ask about PCORI?
Sure.
So we know
that's what it is already.
I know. So we know this started in 2010, and I know that in the past it was associated with the Affordable Care Act. Do we know if this program is going to stay in place, or do we have any idea yet?
Yeah, so it's a great question. We've been getting it a lot, so you shouldn't feel bad asking it. You know, we haven't heard anything from Congress to suggest that PCORI's funding is going away. And here at PCORI, we just are working to ensure that to continue to carry out our mandate, which is to fund patient-centered outcomes research that's important to the healthcare community and that's likely to have a strong impact. So, again, we don't know what the future holds, but we don't have any indication that PCORI's funding will be affected.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions? Okay, so the next section will be to talk a little bit about our research awards and exactly how to apply to PCORI for research funding if it's something that you're interested in. So if we go to the next slide, we have three different types of funding mechanisms here at PCORI. We have our broad funding announcements, and I'll focus most on these types of announcements. Then we have our Pragmatic Clinical Studies funding announcement, and we do issue targeted funding announcements as well. So if we go to the next slide, our broad funding announcement supports research on investigator-initiated research topics that address questions of importance to patients and stakeholders. And this announcement includes 5 different types of awards that align with PCORI's national priorities for research, and I'll cover what those are in on the next slide. Actually, if we go back just for 1 second, the awards range from $750,000 to $5 million in direct costs, and projects are generally 3 years in duration, but there is some variability depending on which national priority area your project aligns with. So now if we go to the next slide, these are our 5 national priorities for research. The first one is the assessment of prevention, diagnosis, and treatment options, and this is the program that I'm aligned with. And what we do is we fund research comparing the harms and benefits of alternative interventions to determine which works best for patients. So these are really patient-level interventions. The next is our Improving Healthcare Systems program, and they fund research comparing different health system-level approaches for improving access and care. So again, these are projects comparing systems-level interventions, and they actually have 2 types of awards. They have smaller research projects that are 2 years in duration, and I believe $2 million in direct costs, and ones that are 5 years in duration and $5 million in direct costs. Then we have our Communication and Dissemination research portfolio, which funds research comparing different ways of providing information produced by CER to patients, clinicians, and other relevant stakeholders. We have our Addressing Disparities national priority area, which supports research comparing interventions to reduce or eliminate disparities in healthcare. And finally, we have our Accelerating PCOR and Methodological Research Program, which supports studies that aim to develop new methods to support comparative effectiveness research. So it's not, these aren't studies that are doing comparative analyses, but instead they're aiming to produce better methods that can be used by other investigators to do comparative effectiveness research. Our Pragmatic Clinical Studies funding announcement provides awards that can be up to $10 million in direct costs per project and are generally 5 years in duration. So these are very, very large studies, and they're usually addressing critical evidence gaps, including topics of special interest to stakeholders, the National Academy of Sciences, the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality. And that funding announcement actually contains a number of high priority research topics that have been identified by those groups. It seeks to produce information that can be directly adopted by providers. It's often conducted in routine clinical settings, and although often large, they are generally less complex protocols than traditional clinical trials. So again, these are studies that really enroll patients from all over the United States, and the goal is to produce, to answer really high priority evidence gaps and to produce evidence that can be directly implemented in practice. And then our last type of funding announcement is our targeted funding announcement. These seek research proposals on the highest priority questions identified through PCORI's topic generation and research prioritization process. And if you want to learn more about that process, I provided a link at the bottom of the slide where you can learn more about that. The budget and project duration varies depending on the funding announcement, but I've listed a couple of examples here, and I just want to highlight that one of these does focus on a rare disease. It's sickle cell disease, and we've currently received all the proposals for that funding announcement, and it's going through PCORI's merit review process. So next slide. On our website, you can find a list of all of the funding opportunities that are currently open by clicking on the link provided. And if you have questions or you're not sure which one of these research programs might be best for your project, you can always get in touch with us by email, phone, or online at the phone number and email address provided. on the PCORI website, we also list all of our funded research projects. So you can take a look. You can actually sort it by rare disease. So if you want to see everything we funded in the area that covers a rare disease, you can look on our Research and Results tab and pull up all of the currently funded studies and read about what they're doing and who the investigators are that are carrying out those projects. Next slide. In terms of who can apply, PCORI accepts applications from any private sector research organization. We also accept applications from public sector research organizations, like the type listed on this slide. And we accept applications from foreign organizations or non-domestic components of U.S. organizations, but only if there's a clear benefit to the U.S. healthcare system and patient-centered research efforts in the United States. Individuals are not able to apply to these types of research awards, but as I'll mention later, we do have some other types of opportunities that accept applications from individuals. Next slide. So any questions about the type of funding opportunities available through PCORI?
So I want to ask a specific question. Is there kind of a group where rare disease might be a little more popular, or have you seen kind of smaller population studies do better in some of these different types of funding?
I think that's a great question. I think it really depends on the type of intervention. So I think where the most rare disease studies are right now is in the assessment of prevention, diagnosis, and treatment options, which is, again, the program that I'm aligned with. But we also see a lot in the Improving Healthcare Systems program. So actually the next two examples, one of them is an Improving Healthcare Systems project, and one is funded through the assessment of prevention, treatment, and diagnosis options. So hopefully by looking at these two different types of funded studies, you'll get a sense of the types of interventions that are supported through each program.
And I promise everyone I wasn't a plant. I promise. We didn't plan this ahead, did we, Danielle?
Nope. Any other questions? All right, so we'll go to the two examples. The first one, if we go to the next slide, is seeking to address the question, what are the comparative benefits and drawbacks of pain management delivered in emergency department versus in dedicated acute care facilities for adults with sickle cell disease? And this is the project that is supported through that Improving Healthcare Systems program. By way of background, individuals with sickle cell disease have irregular hemoglobin in their red blood cells that can cause the cells to change shape and stick to the vessel walls, blocking the flow of blood, and this causes pain and long-term organ damage. There is no cure for sickle cell disease. Treatment instead involves management of pain symptoms, and the investigators make the argument that pain management is often delivered in emergency departments, but an alternative is infusion clinics. And these are the two different types of ways of delivering care that they're comparing in this study. So this is an observational study enrolling 500 adults with sickle cell disease in order to compare pain management delivered in emergency departments to pain management delivered in infusion clinics. And they're looking to see how the care is delivered impacts outcomes, including time to first dose of pain medication and time to discharge home, which through talking with their investigators were determined to be the most important outcomes to patients with sickle cell disease. The overall goal of the study is to change how the healthcare system meets the needs of adults with sickle cell disease who are experiencing a sickle cell crisis. All right, so the second example is something that is supported through the Assessment of Options program. And they are seeking to answer the question, what are the comparative benefits and harms of liver transplantation versus medical management for individuals with urea cycle disorder? So again, by way of background, in people with this condition, the liver can't break down ammonia from protein, and as a result, ammonia accumulates in the brain and can cause brain damage. Treatments include conservative medical management with treatments that metabolize ammonia, amino acid supplements, and low-protein diets, or liver transplantation. And information about how these options impact individuals' quality of life and neurocognitive functioning is lacking. So to compare these two options and generate some additional information that patients, caregivers, and others in the healthcare community can use, these investigators are conducting an observational study of 185 individuals with urea cycle disorder, comparing medical management to transplantation. And their outcomes include quality of life outcomes, neurocognitive status, and survival. They're also doing a qualitative study of caregivers and providers to examine how treatment choices are currently made in order to provide some information about how those decisions could be improved moving forward, or what are some best practices for making that decision. The goal of the study is to provide families and clinicians with evidence-based information so that they can make an informed choice between conservative medical management and liver transplantation. So seeing those two examples, are there any questions, again, about the type of research projects that might be appropriate for PCORI funding?
I'm going to ask another question if no one else does. This is actually a question for someone who couldn't get on the line, and it's interesting because it's someone who works in something similar to urea cycle. They asked the question, in a study like this, is it the idea that multiple centers work together, or what's the best kind of approach when you have such a rare disease to try to get to 180? Does it matter how many centers, and how much more complicated is the application process with so many centers involved?
So I think most of our rare diseases a lot of them leverage networks that are currently existing or centers of excellence that focus on treating people who suffer from the rare disease that they're interested in. So for example, I'm currently working with an investigator who has 22 sites throughout the United States to support her research project. So I don't think that the application process itself is more complicated. We're certainly going to take a look and see if you really do have the ability to recruit the number of patients that you say you'll be able to recruit by looking at, we ask for information about capacity at each site, how many patients they see with the condition of interest, and questions like that to understand really the feasibility of doing the study. I think where things become complicated is, if you are funded, getting through multiple IRBs can become very challenging, and so we do often ask, investigators whether they've thought about having a central IRB or using some other mechanism, and doing all the subcontracting. It also takes a significant amount of time. So I think where it becomes really, really burdensome is on the back end, and I guess to the extent that you don't have a research network that you can leverage, identifying all the centers of excellence or all the sites that see a high volume of patients with the condition of interest can also be challenging.
Danielle.
Anything else? If you don't want to say it on the phone, you can also email me afterwards. So now I want to talk about some of our programmatic awards, and these are awards that are given out not to support research, but to support essentially capacity building, and they're awarded to individuals or groups who are developing research agendas or ideas for research projects. So, if you're in the process of your career where you're really thinking about what is the research question that's of most important in the disease area that I'm focused in, these may be a good option for you. So the first type of award I want to talk about is our Pipeline to Proposal Awards. The goals of these awards are to strengthen relationships between researchers, patients and stakeholders, particularly in communities that have been underrepresented in research, and to build capacity for research or non-research partnerships to create research questions and submit PCOR proposals that can be considered for funding by PCORI or other funding agencies. And finally, to establish an infrastructure that can support this type of research. These awards are open to any individual, and that it can be a patient, it can be a researcher, it can be another type of stakeholder who is focusing on a particular health issue and interested in developing questions that can be addressed by comparative effectiveness research. So the way that these awards are structured are that there's 2 tiers. The first tier provides up to $50,000 per award for 12 months, again, to individuals or groups. And this money is really meant to support the development of partnerships and some initial research prioritization. And there's a second tier, which provides an additional $40,000 for up to 9 months. And the second tier, we ask that leveraging those partnerships that have been created, the team develops a research proposal so that at the end of Tier B, the group has a research proposal that is ready to be submitted to PCORI for funding. And there should be an opportunity for new Tier A proposals later this month. So if you're interested or you think this might be a good option for you, keep an eye out on the PCORI website for the release of that funding opportunity. The other type of programmatic award I want to talk about is the Eugene Washington PCORI Engagement Awards. These engagement awards, while not research-based, provide a platform to expand the role of all stakeholders in research and to support PCORI's engagement imperative. These awards are generally provide up to $250,000 for 2 years in duration. And there's 4 different types, and again, these are open. I believe several of these are open currently on our website using that same link that I provided earlier to get to our funding opportunities. And they include our Knowledge Awards, which aim to increase knowledge about how consumers of healthcare information view, receive, and make use of patient-centered outcomes research and comparative effectiveness research. We have our Training and Development Awards, which aim to build capacity for participating in PCOR and CER and create ways to connect patients, caregivers, clinicians, and other healthcare stakeholders with the research community. We have our Dissemination Awards, which develop and strengthen channels for disseminating and implementing findings from research. And we have our Meeting and Conference Support Awards that provide organizations with funding for meetings and conferences that align with PCORI's mission and aim to facilitate the expansion of this research. So any questions on those types of awards? Again, they're not there to support research. They're really aimed at capacity building so that investigators and other types of stakeholders are ready to engage in research.
Does it matter what stage of the career people are in for that type of award?
No, the proposals are reviewed based on merit, so it doesn't matter what phase you're at. If you are trying to launch a career in comparative effectiveness research, or you have a question that you feel is particularly useful, but you just need some additional time to build up those partnerships, these may be a good option for you. All right, well, if there's no other questions, the last part of my presentation focuses on engagement. And I wanted to spend a few minutes on this because this is a relatively unique requirement for PCORI Research Awards. We do require, as I said, that patients and stakeholders be engaged in every phase of the research process, from the development of the research project through the dissemination of the results. And the goals for this type of engagement are to influence research to be more patient-centered, relevant, and useful, to establish trust and a sense of legitimacy in research findings, and to encourage successful uptake and use of research results. And at the bottom, there's a link to a page on the PCORI website that provides some additional information about what it is that we mean by engagement. If we go to the next slide, the types of people that we expect to be engaged in research projects include all the different types of stakeholders who may be impacted by the conduct of that research and who will likely use the information that is generated. So if we go to the next slide, we talk about both patient partners and stakeholder partners. And where patient partners are defined as individuals who are representative of the population of interest in a particular study, as well as their family members, caregivers, and organizations that represent them. And stakeholder partners are members of constituencies based on professional rather than personal experience, and could include anyone from clinicians to purchasers, payers, industry, hospitals or healthcare systems, policymakers, training institutions, and researchers. So again, I think when you're developing a project, you really need to think about who will be impacted by that project and who you really want to use the results, and then think about how to reach out to those individuals and engage them in various ways throughout the research process. Next slide. To help people think about engagement and how to structure engagement in their research project, we have a number of different materials available on the PCORI website, and those include our engagement rubric, which I'll talk a little bit about on the next slide. We also have some sample engagement plans, as well as a PCORI compensation framework that provides some rough guidelines on how to structure payments to patients and stakeholders who are working in some sort of advisory role. We also have an engagement in research website, and we have our PCORI methodology standards, which isn't something I talked about during this presentation, but they are actually something you should be aware of if you're interested in applying to PCORI. Our methodology standards are just basic requirements that we think should be addressed in all research projects. They focus on a number of different things, from structuring the research design through how to handle missing data and everything in between. And one section of the report focuses on how to ensure that a study is patient-centered. So the link provided here will send you directly to that methodology report so you can take a look at those standards and think through how you're ensuring that you'll meet those standards when conducting your research project. So, so this slide provides information, or just an outline of the different sections contained in the PCORI engagement rubric. And basically what this does is walk you through the different phases of a research project and some ways that you could consider engaging patients and other stakeholders in each of those different phases. It also outlines a couple of six different principles for engagement, including trust, transparency, and a variety of other things. And when people are putting their research projects together, we ask them to talk about how they're going to fulfill those engagement principles in the types of engagement activities that they'll be. And that's pretty much it. That's what I had planned to talk about today. I'm happy to talk about anything else that you may want to know about PCORI or the type of research that we fund, or if you ever want to talk offline about a research idea we're happy to talk to anyone interested in applying.
So this is Deb again. Love to hear some other questions. All of the questions I had were from people that knew they couldn't be online because of clinic needs today, so it was interesting. I was able to tuck them in here and there. Anyone online with us that wants to ask a specific question? Yeah, my Wednesday afternoons are shy, I've learned. But I do want you guys to really consider if this might be the right approach for funding for your work. Sometimes I think we always think it has to be NIH or it has to be, you know, a family group, but I think PCORI is something in rare disease we're not taking advantage of enough. And we really need to be thinking, especially with many of you part of the RDCRN, that maybe there's something in your larger group that we could think about for PCORI funding. So this could be a way that you could be kind of a mover and shaker in your RDCRN group if you're involved in one of those. Or if you have a very ultra-rare disease, for example, Castleman or one of those other rare diseases out there, consider PCORI. And I'll be honest, I've actually given, Danielle, I've given your name to some people, and they've gotten great feedback from you. And I've been really thankful that they got a hold of someone at PCORI. So please consider this funding source. I think it's probably an untapped resource that we're not using enough in rare disease, and our patients deserve this type of funding. So I have...
Yeah, I'll just say we do have a very strong interest in supporting rare disease research. It's actually called out in our founding legislation. And we have a group of people, our advisory panel on rare diseases, who we often go to talk through ways to improve outreach to the rare disease community. So we are increasing our number of applications that we receive that are looking at rare diseases. So it is a strong interest of ours, and you know, we're happy to talk to anyone, again, if you have a research idea.
Yeah, and again, like Danielle mentioned, this is a program where they like innovation, they like people that are younger and thinking about things a little bit of a different way. So this is a place where you don't have to be, you know, a 98-year-old applying for these grants. So this is an early career option you should consider. So Danielle, I can't thank you enough. As always, you do a great job of expressing the goals of PCORI for a group of people that might not have heard of you before. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Sure, no problem. And again, reach out anytime.
Thanks so much. Everyone, looking forward to talking to you guys again next month. You'll be getting an email from me. Again, we're working towards doing your evaluations, and based on those evaluations, we'll have our topics for April. We will be doing our advocacy topic, but if there's specific topics you want to hear about in the next 2 months, spring is always a time for you to think about what other resources do I need right now. So think about those and shoot me an email. We will be doing another statistics lecture based on the few evaluations I've already received. So if you want a refresher on statistics, we do have that 1-hour seminar we did last September you could always pop into. Again, it's always recorded there. And we'll be having another person who does a lecture that's a little interesting. He's going to go through a rare disease case where they did statistics on, get this, only 4 patients, and how they made that work and how they got statistical significance. So again, thanks everyone for joining us today, and have a great afternoon. Text, email, anytime if we can be of help to move your rare disease work forward. Thanks, Danielle, and everyone have a great day. Bye, everyone.
Bye.